Clark. I work for the Elkhart County Soil and Water Conservation District. My job title is conservationist, but I would consider myself a water quality of life warrior, really focusing more on stormwater, but also bringing the correlation of stormwater and also the ag industry together and having them understand that it's all raining, it lands on all of us. How do we deal with it from both perspectives? And sometimes we can deal with it together. So this presentation is called the CSG. What does the CSGP have to do with me? So what Jim was just talking about, the construction stormwater general permit replaced what used to be called Rule 5. And I think if you ask most people around here, they're gonna know what Rule 5 is. They're not gonna know what the CSGP is. So the construction stormwater general permit replaced Rule 5 in 2021. It is taking what used to be a rule and turned it into just a general permit, which gave the IDEM and basically the people that work within stormwater the ability to change the permit every 5 years versus going through the process of a rule change, which is much more difficult. And that way, knowing that things change frequently in the stormwater industry and our weather patterns tend to change, this gives them an opportunity to react more quickly. So as a permit gets finalized, goes through the public discussion and all of the different edits, really by the time that gets put into place, they start almost right back over moving through that process again. So it's an ever evolving permit that they want to make sure they're addressing all the things that need to be addressed. So what do people in our community, what role do they have to play? So this can be anybody from somebody who's farming, a couple 100 acres to several thousand acres. This can apply to somebody who's got an excavator that just is doing some odd jobs on the side. I think one thing that you probably know is that a lot of these farms, they all have an excavator on site because they're operators. They can use them and they do small jobs, but the temptation might be to go out in the industry and do some big jobs if they can get paid to do it, depending on what's going on. So, right.
On now?
Got the person, but they're not advancing. So that slides there, a little advance if we're just in the arrow forward or space.
Yeah, it does. Okay,
Let's just do it that.
that's bizarre. Okay, sorry about that.
So what is the construction stormwater general permit? It is the permit that covers all of the people working within a county that work a state of Indiana, and they're disturbing more than 1 acre of land. Now, different areas have chosen to enact in their ordinances that if you disturb less than 1 acre, it might trigger for you to operate under the construction stormwater general permit. That is up to the local authorities to make that determination. So if your county or your city wants to regulate smaller parcels of land, they can do so as long as their ordinances state that. Recently, we've had a change in that. House Bill 1037 actually made it so that it can only be as stringent as the actual 1 acre item permit. So right now, this is law for the whole entire state. If you had an ordinance in place, it is now default ordinance, but they have to default back to this. They cannot go by their own local ordinances. So that doesn't mean that the rules change at all. The thing about the cities within Elkhart County and Elkhart County is we've never been more stringent than what was laid out in the general permit. So that doesn't necessarily affect us, which is a good thing. Now, the construction stormwater general permit works in tandem with the MS4 general permit. So Elkhart County is known as an MS4. They've been designated as such for quite some time. That means the city of Elkhart, the city of Goshen, the town of Bristol and Elkhart, the rest of Elkhart County as a whole are all designated as MS4s. And we have our own permit, the MS4 general permit that we sign on. And we have a stormwater board, which is our county commissioners and the county surveyor that regulate all of the MS4, the construction stormwater general permit within our county. So we don't, if you go into LaGrange County, they aren't designated as an MS4. None of the cities are large enough there to operate as MS4. So the SWCD would be the representative of IDEM in that county as the sort of enforcement agent. Really, it falls on IDEM because SWCDs don't do enforcement. So what makes it complicated is that not everybody's on an equal footing. We're all different. So you can go to LaGrange County and you can build and you don't have somebody breathing down your neck regulating the same way you might here in Elkhart because we have to operate and meet the requirements of our MS4 permit. So what qualifies for a permit? And the first thing I said earlier was 1 acre or more, but the requirements of the construction stormwater general permit applies to all persons. So not just businesses, it's all persons who are involved in construction activity, which includes clearing, grading, excavation, and other land disturbing activities that result in the disturbance of 1 acre or more of total land area. Which means it doesn't have to be ridiculous. It can be a little bit here, a little bit there, but total 1 acre. If the land disturbing activity results in the disturbance of less than 1 acre of total land area, but is part of a larger common plan of development or sale, the project must obtain permit coverage under the CSGP. So, larger common plan of development would be a major example, a neighborhood. So if somebody develops a neighborhood, a developer comes in and they put in the road infrastructure, and then they have 75 lots. Within that, all of those lots are part of what's called a larger common plan development.
So would example be like a Cherry Creek development?
That is 100%
Right, I mean, I feel
Cherry
that's,
Creek. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Now another one that's kind of that people don't necessarily think about would be like you build a Walmart, right? Now it's not just a Walmart. There's maybe a McDonald's in the parking lot. There's a Chipotle in the parking lot. There's another restaurant, a Texas Roadhouse. So a McDonald's might only be a half of an acre that they build on, but because they're part of a larger common plan of development with Walmart that has outlots, that has to have its own permit coverage. So there are some different things that kind of fall into that. Now, here's the other one. That really is mostly what applies to agricultural industry. If you have an area of your property that maybe you want to put a pond, and maybe somebody approaches you who's working on a project and they need builder, if you just happen to have builder on your property, and somehow maybe they go to church with you, they know this. They approach you, hey, I want to take builder. Well, guess what? Your area where they're taking that would be considered a borrow area, but then it would also be considered part of a larger common plan development. Now that's kind of loosely connected, but what that means is you become part of the project. And a lot of people don't understand that any offsite area, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, it ends up falling under that thing. Now here's where it really gets tricky. If they make your pond larger than 1 acre, you have to get your own stormwater permit. So it can be very shocking information when people find this out. They just wanted to have a pond for their kids to swim in, and all of a sudden it's turned into an $8,000 project that they weren't expecting. So are there exemptions to this permit? So requirements of the general permit do not apply to persons involved in agricultural land disturbing activities. However, there is a definition of what those agricultural land disturbing activities are and what they do not include in the construction of these items. So, anything that is land disturbance associated with the construction of these types of facilities are required to comply with the CSGP. So we think, hey, this is just ag. But if you're building a barn, guess what? You need a permit if you disturb more than 1 acre. Any outbuildings, you need a permit. Roads associated with infrastructure, you would need a permit. So that's kind of a tricky one. It applies primarily to roads that are being constructed to provide access to a facility, barn, or outbuilding. If you are building a road that is just going to give you access to pasture or to an agricultural field where you're growing row crops, that does not count. So that is exempt. But if you're building a building and you need a way to get to that building, that's part of the total land disturbance. So you might think you're building a half-acre building, but it's probably, if you're building a lane that's a half a mile long, guess what? You're disturbing more than an acre. Waste lagoons and facilities. That's a big one. A lot of people don't realize if you're putting in a lagoon, that's disturbance. And it can be really bad disturbance if you don't do it appropriately. Lakes and ponds, we kind of covered that a second ago. The other one is constructive wetlands. That's a wow, why would that apply? But really, there's a lot that goes into these constructive wetlands, especially in, this is what Clay was going to cover a lot of. But, you think about an opportunity to do some mitigation with you're building a project and you have a 1/10 of an acre or a 1/4 of an acre where you disturb it, and you need to mitigate that somewhere else. That might end up being in an agricultural area. The thing is, it needs to fall typically within the same watershed, if possible, to do that type of mitigation on wetlands. But if you're doing an engineered wetlands, it does need to have a permit. Some things that don't need to have a permit, and this is a lot of what we do with like our swamp program or NRCS funded type stuff. So like WASCOBs or water and sediment control basins, you don't have to have a permit to construct one of those. Grass waterways, terraces, grade straight stabilization structures, that kind of thing, that can go without a permit, even disturb one on that. Agricultural conservation practices with waterways, terraces, water and sediment control basins, and grade stabilization stones. The other ones, tillage, planting, cultivation, harvesting, and operation for the production of agricultural, nursery, or vegetative crops are exempt. So it also, pasture renovations and construction of agricultural conservation practices, think drainage tile, not applicable. Now, if it's a drainage tile that is draining a project that has a stormwater pollution prevention plan, guess what? That's tied into that. Now, if you're just putting a pattern tile in the field, it doesn't apply. So something to kind of consider there. Where it gets tricky, like silviculture, forestry management, that's exempt. That doesn't count. I didn't put that in there, but that's one that I've had a lot of people ask.
And I think all this is overall down to under that.
It does indeed, yes. And so we don't, but when it gets tricky, a lot of times we'll see large swaths of ground with trees cleared from it.
This is the question, given what you're seeing this, this observing on 46 with New Paris, when it's disappearing, I said.
And it might go a little bit at a time, it might be a large chunk. The thing that we have to operate under is if they put row crops in, it's exempt.
Okay.
So if they farm that ground, that's exempt.
So in a sense, the site preparation, it's not ending up in a building,
Correct.
it's ending up in crops, then that's the higher.
Correct.
That's
exempt.
and that gets very freaky. There's some ways that you can try to. Want to go out a little bit, see about it, eventually also out. It's exempt, but that's one of the things we want agriculture farmers to understand. Like, they're a big fence over time. We can have some paths, and I have to be clusters, or if we get a complaint, somebody calls in, maybe complains, the worst sounds more. Well, then it's going to go from, and so then it's, so what would be the, I mean, I recognize that any of this is to be proactive so you don't have problems, sedimentation. So like say you're clearing a woodlot and it's on slow and it takes a little while before you finally get it into crops, you improve cropping, but then you have sheet erosion, you turn
is that its own dynamic or it's, well, this is just, I mean, it's just like any other non-point source pollution on top. I mean, it's not coming, but is that,
It'd be the same as, you know, whole tillage, I guess, if you really want to think of it that way.
Being. I lost $20,000 if we buy the light, right along the wood side, and equipment now that, and I think it's moved from the road. It took months to get all that done, right? If we had. The flash down the bottom of it. There are things that, yeah, these, that's it.
So-
Cautionary.
And I think that when we look at this as a whole, I think we can all agree that for the most part, people who farm are generally good stewards of it, right? They don't want to lose any more of their soil than they have to. I'm not saying they're all the best actors, but for the most part, which is why they're given an exemption, because you got to draw a line somewhere on certain things. And I think Farm Bureau, they have good representations and make sure that they're not having to go through so much bureaucratic red tape to get things done. It's kind of a pain. Now this is where our argument is, and this is where we really try to bring these folks together, because if I'm working as building buildings and I'm having to follow a certain set of rules, but I can watch a farmer drive a manure tanker into a field and drag half of it back out onto the roads, I'd be pretty bitter too. You know, it really boils down to what fair is fair, but you know, and that's, again, not everybody's that way, but when you see it, you get frustrated. So we try to explain this as best we can so people understand what's the place, and also educate. If you're going to have a pad or an ingress pad that you're going to have on a farm where you're going to be entering and leaving the field, you should do something to really make sure that you're not dragging when you have it out on the roadways. But that it would be very difficult to manage all of it. There's a lot of miles of road, a lot of acres of fields.
One of the things that we really try to, pull from sides, from construction side of it, the ag side of it is master farming. If you know you have a pan through the activity, you have a tributary road, an area where water sheds off within the ditch. We try to talk a little bit what I like about it. Now I kind of went back to them. And some talk with there that, so it's when our big settle was mighty. We know that eventually it's probably going to be stabilized, and it will be a little while to the path eventually. But in that meantime, and we've worked with several individuals that, okay, let's do cost share seed an area. I don't want to see silk fence out in the ag field. It's not because it's gonna make me do what? Right. Whereas you say they already got it already. Next year, silk fence, because it's it. And every time they go to town, kids go down, like if you're over, people go. But a natural buffer, will help clean all that up, set it back, and allow water to still flow through, and then they can mitigate that. That risk. And that's some of the full correlation. Yeah.
So it's just another kind of thing that talks about the extension of a project, right? So provide a service to a project, borrow site, road extension, utility extension, disposal sites, those all get included in the project itself.
but you mentioned clarification. So you have the project and then you have the disposal of borrow. In a sense, that cumulative disturbance, you've got to take that together to say, look, you've exceeded 1A. I mean, that's how that got there.
Correct.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways to sort of circumvent the system or doing different things. You know, one of the things kind of discussed as far as the House Bill 1037 goes. So one of the things that they added in later on is that even though you can't require a developer to submit a stormwater pollution prevention plan for anything under an acre, you still now are, if you are breaking any of the rules that are set forth by the permit, the regulatory authority has the authority to come in and shut down the project.
Even though it's
Even though it's under the
but
other
it has
acre.
to, in a sense, now it becomes reactive and so.
Correct. So as a county, we operate as on a complaint-based system for the most part. We require a stormwater water pollution prevention plan, but on certain things, we're going based off of complaints. We do routine inspections and that type of thing, but really, we're not going out on the site and shutting things down unless it's really there are several issues that pose threat to the public. Really, is what it boils down to. Are you dumping your water onto your neighbors? Number one, and number two, are you causing something that might, if a motorcycle drives by, something wreck because there's so much stuff on the road? Or, those are the things that we're really looking for more. And if you keep it contained to your square, we're only going to make recommendations on how you could maybe do it a little better, because really it boils down to cost on that type of thing. So one of the things that to kind of educate you a little bit on how we operate, we've got the stormwater partnership that I mentioned: City of Goshen, City of Elkhart, the town of Bristol, and Elkhart County. Those four entities form the Greater Elkhart County Stormwater Partnership, and as an SWCE, we're kind of the hub of all of that activity. So we are the glue that connects all of those partners together. We do the plan review, the inspections, but they're the enforcement authority. So they have the ability to go into a project as the city and say, hey, if you don't make this correction, don't shut it down. We can tell them, hey, you have an issue on this particular project, but that's how we operate. It's good cop, bad cop. So we're there to help educate. They're there to do the enforcement. And the other thing to think about is if you're putting anything that's permanent infrastructure in, which would be make a sediment retention basin. If you put in a catch basin or a dry well on the property, you're required by the permit to maintain that into perpetuity. Even if you sell the property, they have to maintain that forever. It doesn't fall under the highway. So the highway is not necessarily going to come to your business. It's all going to come to your business and suck out your catch basin where your stormwater goes. That falls directly on the private owner of that. But that's part of this whole process. Like not only are you putting it in and protecting it during active construction, there's a post-construction piece that you have to both inspect and maintain those best management practices. The biggest miss on this is neighborhoods. They build 100 homes, and there's not a single one of them who are communicating with one another unless they've got a good homeowners association, which I haven't found one in Elkhart County yet. And then they have a mechanism with which to pay for the maintenance of those basins, because they inevitably fill up with sediment. Trees grow up in them, and half the time people build little playgrounds in them. It turns into more than what it's meant to be, which is storage for major storm event.
Or your lawn clippings.
Dump your grass, your leaves. It's a catch-all.
We finally go to college when we built that up. They don't have any. They don't plant any lawn. Very second. People come out, and I don't know why.
It's a great place.
Stuff. It's just a pit.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that's the hard part about all of this, and I think that I grew up in the neighborhood, and I think my dad probably knew what the purpose of that was, but we lived on a retention basin. We were at the very bottom of the neighborhood, and I thought it was a pond. I was like, this is great, because most of the time there was at least some water in it. We had frogs, nature. It was unfortunately, as I've grown older and realized what that actually served, and now I can still drive by it. It's on my way home. picking my girls up. It's just overgrown up with trees and it's a mess. Like I want to go in and dredge it myself because I'm like, yeah, that's not supposed to be that way. But that's one of those things where we have to educate better for people to understand. And then in the process of planning, whoever is doing the development has to do a better job of conveying the message to the the homeowners association or whoever they can let know, hey, you guys are responsible for this. And it even comes down to how planning and zoning approves the plans, who's got the stake in the maintenance of that. Because if you sell it off with just the 5 parcels that might be around it, then guess what? Those 5 people don't realize that they're buying into the maintenance of that. Whereas if you turn it into a common area where everybody has 1/100th of ownership of that, then when it comes down to we're forcing you to clean this out, every single person who owns property that drains to that then has a piece of it. So it's a difficult thing to do, and we get it several different ways, and there's no right way or wrong way. I think usually it's a good call for us. It's fortunate part. The word about.
Yeah.
The first flooded basement.
Nobody bought the.
It's right.
It's much like when homeowners got homes too. We had a little second. You guys have, then, but there's a retention, like, how does this work? And then you go back, we go in and try to educate, and it's unfortunate people don't have to work with people. They build it. Yeah, that collaborative, tie-in back and forth is something that we discuss.
In this,
So,
in this point, it's so, I began my career working soil conservation districts and subdivision. In fact, I was one to clean water act. I did the full water programs, there was like, there's no lake cottages and stuff, that was the level. But I'm so intrigued and I'm glad how much now, so now we get it happy, you know, things with old age. And I'm grateful for that, but it's just that they can get this. And the only one farmer that we're doing okay. Well, now you got all these and it's still serving the same purpose. Yeah, so I commend you. But it's more than I want.
And I think that the more awareness that there is, the more questions that arise on, because every single circumstance is different, and you have to really make judgment calls. And you have to live with what you tell people, and that's the hard part. Like, you don't necessarily, there isn't a defined answer. And so sometimes you're just telling, well, and then you have to own it if it goes wrong. And that's where some people take the, hey, hands off. I'm not touching that, call an engineer, and the engineer can. But what we try to do is you can call an engineer, but here's the thing, it's common sense. If you think that this is something that you can do and you want to do it on the cheap, that's fine. When things fail, just give me a call, we'll work on it. I get it, but because they don't always know exactly what to do. But the main thing that we look at, like with this kind of thing, is when it boils down to it, I kind of talked a little bit earlier. It's where is the problem visible to the public? And it turns out mainly you're going to be dealing with roads. So this is the main. We put in construction entrances, right? And I think a lot of people, the first thing we think that does is you're not bucking up the soil, right? You have an entrance, you're going in and out of. But really, its intention is to knock the sediment off the tires as you leave the project. So it needs to be a bit larger, number 2 stones, and then it needs to be maintained because it will fill with mud. And you can see in this picture right here, it's been, they put some smaller aggregate down to make it, because that was driven out of the driveway at number 2 stone, your tires will spin, and then you put yourself in real danger. So that's not the worst thing, but then you have to maintain it differently. And you can see down here in the left corner, that's what happens with the roads. Now, it's not necessarily the end of the world. What it boils down to is somebody driving through Brandon lets us do that, and they have to put car wash. So quality of life issue. Same thing with what's called fugitive particles, or as we like to call it, dust blowing in the wind. That is as big an issue as what's on the road, because it becomes a vision issue, but it also is a breathing issue. It can be, depending on where you're at, that can be the biggest issue of all. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but even you can see in this kind of picture to the left, that's actual dust, what it looks like. But when somebody's complaining to me, that is how it's described. It is 1940s Oklahoma. We're in the Dust Bowl, and it's blowing everywhere. My kid's got asthma. It's always the worst case scenario. So we want people to understand it's all about perception, and be cognizant where you're working who may be affected by it. The other thing, it's the same with tracking in the road. That's what it typically looks like, just some dirt sediment out on the road. But when they call and they describe it, that's them standing there trying to get out of their driveway. It's a real mess. So, and our county and city employees are all trained to bring awareness to this. Like, this is the thing where they all drive to work through the county, just like you do. And what they do is pick up the phone and they call you and they say, "Hey, this is the project you approved, and this is your thing. What are you going to do about it?" And they just love to stir the pot. So those guys are going to be the ones with tattletale. And the other one that's going to be the biggest tattletale is the contractor or the farmer who got in trouble because he did it. And so guess what? Every time he sees it from here on out, he's going to let you know about it. So people are looking at that stuff. So a couple things. What does the CSGP have to do with you? Probably more than you think. Take a minute to consider. This is how does it benefit Elkhart County? I mean, that's the name. Or our watershed, or our America, what the world. We're trying to prevent a lot of this, which is, a small stream running through, and it might not seem like much, but you've got a ton of erosion going into it. Sediment. I listened to one of our board members yesterday telling me about how he was standing at the confluence of two ditches, right? And there was one ditch that was running, and of course that's the one that went through his farm. It was perfectly clear. It looked like he could drink from it. Well, the one that was coming from the other direction was soupy, muddy, nasty, and he just needed to figure out where that was coming from. And it's one of those things where the people know, they recognize it, they care, but really it's we want less of that. We want people to understand the impacts of the little impacts can change things. Great. This is a neighborhood in New Paris. Putting the soil stockpile right against the road when they made the basement. And then they actually put, this is kind of hard to see, but that's inlet protection. But what they don't paint it, said it fills a segment. Well, guess what? You can see that road was totally flooded. So it's not just having the best intentions, but also following through with the maintenance on it. And then, in a neighborhood like this where they're building homes and you're driving out and just tracking everything on the road, it could be a mess. But we're looking for a little bit more of this, some best management practices, silt fence around that soil stockpile. A nice drive where people are actually parked on it, not next to it. Yeah, you can park your bicycles in the grass next to it, but the vehicles that will track out, let's put them on that stone pad. And then when you're building a parking lot and it's designed to sheet flow, what are you doing to prevent that from just causing all kinds of erosion? Stone diaphragm, straw wattles directing it, and then putting erosion control blanket down to hold your soil in place. So more of that. And then I also do a training, like it's all about education and outreach, right? So the construction stormwater general permit means CSGP, and so you see I like to use that. But what's the CSGP have to do with me? This is something I provide. One of the requirements is permitted. You have an open project, you have to have a trained individual do your inspections for you. You have to do weekly inspections, and then anytime it rains more than a half inch, you have to do another inspection of all of your best management practice to put that in place.
So does that mean that the requirement is somebody on your crew?
It can be somebody on your
Yeah,
crew. You can hire someone.
Yeah.
You just
It's not,
typically
well,
it's,
we pay tax money, that's your problem. You don't
nope,
have this
right.
level. Okay.
There's
Yeah.
Yeah, it's your own person. And what we do is, so a lot of times, to save money, they'll just either not do the inspections, or they'll have somebody who goes out, takes a couple pictures, and really doesn't know what they're looking at. And so this training is a free training. So if you've ever been to, like most of these certifications for being a trainer are anywhere from $600 to $1,000 to become a certified. You get like a certificate on it. This is something that we do free locally, and where it bridges the gap is project starts, the contractor's on site, and they have a trained individual who does the inspections, but then they're done building the building, the parking lot's in, and now we're waiting for the grass to grow. So DJ Construction has moved on, they take all the guys that go on to the next project, but the grass isn't all the way grown. So we can't close out the permit until we have a 70% density uniform coverage on restoration, whatever you do. So this is a way that we can take somebody maybe who works for the company, somebody who works in the office, and we can give them enough of an education they can know what they're inspecting, but then they don't have to pay money to go get certified. So it's kind of a nice thing that we've done here, and I do it virtually. I do it at the office. I do it. And I can go to your job site and do it with. It's a really good training.
Other towns in the done this or
Not some anything.
okay.
Not because it really, and I get a lot of eye rolls because it's sort of the above and beyond, what's really necessary. A lot of them will say, well, what, make them go get the certification, make them pay $700. And for me, why would I want somebody to go get a $700 training to watch grass grow? But this will give them a little bit of training. It makes them a sort of trained individual. And then it also, like I said, bridges that gap, because really when it boils down to it, they've already blown the budget on the bill. They don't, they never want to say not the budget. So.
The one piece of case for this, they need to pay inflation piece. Right, the bill was up. Well.
Yeah, they're making our money.
We're not making money off of is the landscape extension of grass. That's more of, and so if that is done,
Weeds will grow eventually.
Yeah.
That's around this time.
one of the things that we real stress and thought it a great job of bringing this into kind of really and where you're at, it makes because now you have it's based on relationships and that one-on-one kind of seen in prior years where enforcement needs to, and it doesn't end up good because then we bring in the work, and have to educate and explain things to those people that shouldn't really be involved in it at all, but are now tied into that enforcement. We spend more time explaining and doing that than if we would have just explained it to to stay out of it. And enforce was tight.
Like you said, then you build up a relationship.
Yes, yeah.
And
now,
go get your training,
so you gotta make it fun, you gotta make it enjoyable, you gotta make it kind of yours. Done that with great. And now we've seen that my team called come in, not as components, but hey, what can I? How many people are what do I need? Okay, so
And
it's
that
that
will reach out now.
Because now, right, you're creating a rapport with somebody, and we think that's way better than. And I think a lot of times people are afraid that because I do it either individually or I can get a team of people, like I'll go to DJ Construction, for example, and I'll sit in there. They'll have a scheduled weekly or monthly meeting with all the project managers. And if I can get the hour that, hey, I can do this after, because they all need continuing education as well. I've been to our Yoder Construction, Ancon Construction, New Way Construction, all of our big local constructors, and done this. But then I can also try to tie in to some of the people, because if you didn't know, within an average of 12 chicken farms are built in here. They all have stormwater pollution prevention. So instead of not embracing that or thinking I have some kind of cultural difference with that, the person who's building that. I embrace it. I go there. Let's talk about this together. Let's do, and there, I print out inspections instead of them having to do it digitally. They can do it on paper. This is what we're looking for. This is why we're doing it. And then what happens is that gets talked about, and then the next person in their church or in their congregation or whoever will contact me. Hey, somebody was telling me that this is a thing for you to be at my home, and they have the wife there. They bring me food. They do all. It's very, and it turns into a good thing, a positive thing, versus me going out there on inspection and seeing that they've got a concrete washout and they're also burning wood in it and doing things. It takes a little bit of that out of the equation. So I think that that's more of the approach that we've taken, and it's pace. So that was. This is a picture. Those are active projects in our town, and you can see where there's a concentration in the city. There's Napanee down there, lots going on in Middlebury and up that 13 corridor, city of Elkhart, but it doesn't stop there. It's out everywhere.
Yeah. Different cultural communities.
There's a lot of different reasons. So there's everything from linear projects that NIPSCO does, where they're upgrading our, several years ago it was identified that Elkhart County is so far behind on infrastructure. What did they equate us to in 1984? Well, just what we think.
Just the economic development. So, like buildings, we're now, I think, up there. I think we got standards. You mean the building code, or
No,
like is our technology? What building really just don't have the electrical
Electrical grid infrastructure.
So by bringing in
automation that would generally
Talking
fill
about kind of the underground or above ground infrastructure that
when
ties
they look at the Detroit's, Chicago, and the big out of that here. It's just a little different. We would be able to house and put in that type of on
in order for Amazon to put it there, we had to, and it happened after they built their building. We had to upgrade all of our infrastructure to support that. We had to build a new road. We had to build. We had to bring in AEP. We had to run a direct line. We had so many things that we had to do, and the whole county as a whole has to do that. But with that, all of our schools have upgraded all of their athletic facilities. They've upgraded their, the performing arts centers are all getting upgraded because it's just aging and it needed a refresh. But the other part of it is, what are we attracting? If it's just our local typical RV that's expanding, we know that expands and contracts. And then we have acres and acres and acres of empty lots that we should park these stuff. They're all now they're in the chain. Yeah, the chain link fence with lights.
Look at that map. So it's very interesting to look at. I'll give it to you. Right? Yeah. See, I did it. We worked through that. So that square, the Elkhart County, that's basically 300,000 acres. And we generally lose about 1,000 to 1,500 acres a year.
as in changing land uses.
Okay, so so now, so the interesting, when I look at that, I look at not just develop like things going on in building. There's a lot of statement. It's all sorts of different stakeholders. It's not just, so when you look at that, and you look at 300,000 acres, 125,000 acres can still add. Well, that's a lot. So if you have to intermingle all of that together, then you start picking out recreation. Probably. Plus, so overall, we're like that's, all cities all have parks and areas when you start taking that all in. Then you start separating out. There's 3,000 acres of rivers, streams, different tributaries, St. Joe, parts of all that flow through. So now, look at all that. If you look, you know where the rivers are. Yeah. A lot of that's taking place. Yeah. Right. Now, most corridors along, because that's what they, with the reason the ocean is going down. There's a river. That's where we sell parts where that water, the rails were settled. And that they, I heard churches, the old mill race I found in a lot what that was working. Oh, that's, yeah, but the mill race, yeah, that's probably, and so we're not gonna change that, but what we have to do is to help improve, those areas, much like the lake associations and whatnot, water runs into those, how we keep that from, because the expensive piece is that the threat you can set it through the road, so that those maps start with, the 1% lead down the Del Cartel in that St. Joe River, so water is a big factor in that. How in the ag, huge factor, right? So plus you can factor that.
We are smart. When I lived in Texas for a long time, like that's just sort of pretty virginal, right? The way we treat water everywhere in the country is different. We have water that we bring from the ground.
Right.
So big well, we all get fresh water with chemical. It's not that way. So we protect water here for different reasons than we might somewhere else. But nonetheless, we all have to kind of take care of it. It's that mindset. We've taken we've those losses. One what happens to now. I always use it for food. We bring out a leak of down here in this area. Big about it, we clean all that water up. Before it gets Did anybody switch up on?
before it gets to that the savings that could take place, taxpayers did. So that's. Yeah, I go along with like something in that I work with this people. We got state hydraulic going on and says, I was so about to these up and it was all this huge racial spark that all this water. And I looked up and studied these things. What we call these studies and now, because everything runs off and it's said, don't lose that treasure as long as it right. And that's the thing, even on our ag side, we push more and more. How do we hold that water on the hill now? Because if it drops on the hill, I don't want it to run down the bottom. I want it to soak in that crops there too. I need to stand bit. Well, thanks so much for the work you do.